You've gotten your eyes on Sign Stealer, the Connor Stalions documentary on Netflix. And finally, you got to hear his side of the story. But you also learned recently that I was a big part of this, having talked to him starting on October 23rd forward. But there was another person who was involved that really helped us out a lot, helped us figure out why were we a step ahead? Why did we know what was coming next? Well, that's due to the expertise of Steve Deace. And we are going to talk to him right now on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday. We're back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And we're going to welcome on Michigan podcast. That's Steve Deace. You know him. You love him. You've heard his takes. He and I had some friction years ago when it came to our Michigan takes. I think we're mostly on the same page now. Wouldn't you say?
I would. Basically, it just came down to you're way nicer than me.
That I don't know if that's 100% true. You're more of a truth teller, and I like this. I don't like conflict, and you're not afraid to get into conflict, which is why I brought you in when it came to this whole saga. So after I had started talking to Connor, day one was just, how you doing, man? Day two was, I'm going to go ahead and start telling you things on his end. Day two, at some point, I said to him, I follow politics pretty closely, as I know you can attest. I got to a point where I was like, this is clearly a political hit job. We talked about that on the show. And I was like, I know a Michigan fan who absolutely knows all about combating political hit jobs. He would know the anatomy of it. He would understand how this is working, what the next step is going to be. So I at first said, Connor, you should talk to Steve. And then eventually I was like, Connor, let's call Steve right now. So that's what I did. So what was your recollection? What was your initial reaction? Because he was the central figure in college football very quickly and very mysterious in the whole gamut of the media as far as it pertains to the sport. And then suddenly you're on the phone with him and you're advising him. What do you remember about those early conversations with Connor?
You know, the thing I think I remember most is my son, who's now a senior in high school, and watching the documentary. He's a lot like Connor. I mean, my son dressed up as Jim Harbaugh for Halloween twice in 2 years in a row. All right. I mean, I'm down here in my maize and blue man cave. My son grew up in a maize and blue colored painted bedroom himself, you know, and he used to, when he was a little dude, he used to cry when Michigan lost, just like the videos of Connor. He comes up the first night that we're talking and overhears the conversation, and he's like, who are you talking to? You know, and given his dad works in politics, everybody in this family knows how to keep secrets. So I told him, and it blew his mind. And a few weeks later, we're going up to the Michigan-Purdue game for our annual family trip. And my buddy Josh over at Hillsdale, who's probably tuned in and listening to this, so heads up to Josh, he doesn't know I'm involved in this at all. And so the whole ride up to Ann Arbor, he is just talking my ear off about this thing and how crazy this story is, and he can't believe it. And I look in the rearview mirror, Isaiah, and my son Noah is just sitting there beaming like my dad's a gangster, you know, because he knows that I'm well aware of what's happening here. But I'm keeping confidences, you know, and that's probably the most surreal aspect of this. I mean, I've been offered jobs by men who would become president of the United States. I've worked for people who tried to become president of the United States. I've been involved in politics at every level. This is maybe the most, and I've seen things, brother. I have seen things. This is one of the most surreal things, though, I've ever seen. But from day one, what I recognized was Michigan was the victim of what we call in politics a psyop. Now, what is a psyop? A psyop is the leveraging of a platform or the coordinated leveraging of multiple platforms with the intent of getting a drastic course of action to occur before the full ramifications of what's being alleged or with the full consequences of that action being taken are fully and understood and considered. Basically, trying to get a verdict out of a jury before they've actually seen any evidence to the contrary or any kind of cross-examination. That's essentially what this is. And it was also very clear to me. I work on the right, but the right does this to the left and the left does this to the right. this more often happens to the right politically in America because the left has more favorable voices in corporate media. And it was very clear to me that Michigan as an institution, and most public universities are left of center. That's probably not breaking news to anybody tuned in here. It was very clear to me they had no idea how to handle being hit from media that they normally view to be friendly to them. And they were stammering. And what I was concerned about, first of all, I wanted to know, is Connor a sincere individual? And I mean, it's just beyond likable from the get-go. And I can just tell your audience, everything you saw in that documentary is exactly what I saw privately behind the scenes, conversing with him for weeks. And so that's the first thing to me, because if he's not a sincere individual, as much as I love Michigan, I'm gonna tap out. Okay. But if he's a sincere individual, then yeah, I'm interested in this because, I just like any other Michigan fan, I sat there when Rashawn Gary said he got offered $400,000 to switch his commitment on signing day, and he was clearly inferring that was probably Clemson, who was at the other school. No one followed up. No one wanted to report on that. I watched our basketball team lose a national championship to a Louisville team that was literally recruited by strippers and hoes. Literally recruited by strippers and hoes. We lost a national championship to them. I watched us get our asses kicked for 20 years to a program whose quarterback jumped on Twitter to say, I didn't come here to play school. I'd about had it with uneven playing fields here. And now you want to and I looked at the rule myself. The worst you could say is that he went too far in exploiting what is an obvious loophole in a rule. But this is, so it's sign stealing is not illegal, but maybe the method he did. And that's worth this level of coverage. This is the Black Sox scandal. Players aren't going to be safe. People were saying things that were utterly preposterous and easily disproven. And that showed me that this is a psyop. And my concern is that if Michigan did not recognize that, what would end up happening is that they would essentially try to throw Connor under the bus. And his attorney in the documentary kind of alluded to, hey, they said that they fired him, but he really resigned. And you don't want to turn Connor into an enemy either. That doesn't make any sense. This is a loyal fan and member of the coaching staff for what is at the very worst a technicality, if anything at all. And I was concerned that Michigan would panic and turn him into an enemy, make him feel like it's him against the rest of the world. And then you have the coach implicated and dragged into this. And so the first thing you're doing when you're managing a psyop is you got to recognize it. Number one, take a deep breath, then try to figure out where is it coming from, because that's then how you'll know how to respond to it and whom to respond to. And the most obvious sign of this, and this is, sports media, this is kind of the amateur version of what I do politically. I mean, the fact that, a Buck slapped me 69 on Twitter seemingly knew what Pete Thamel was going to report an hour and a half every time before he did. Like in my line of work, okay, if somebody at Fox News gets a download from a Republican or somebody at MSNBC gets a download from a Democrat, GOP 27 doesn't jump on Twitter and say, hey, wait till you see what Jesse Waters is going to say in 90 minutes, because then everybody would freaking know. We're not morons. You don't leave that kind of a trail that you're dropping an op on somebody. You're doing an oppo dump on somebody. So the fact that for some odd reason, the Ohio State Twitter social media message board community seemingly had an intimate carnal knowledge of what ESPN's headline story was going to be at dinner time multiple nights was the first sign something smelled rotten in the state of Denmark. And so you have to recognize the psyop so everybody will calm down and not play into it. If you panic, you play into it. And then the second thing is, where's it coming from so that you can then respond to it? And then the third thing is, what ultimately gets this to a situation that is satisfactory for everybody that's being targeted by the psyop. And to me, that looks like the Michigan needed to not turn Connor Stalions into enemy number one when that wasn't true and unnecessary. And then number two is for Connor to then realize that he's not on his own. He's got plenty of support. I frankly think the guy's a folk hero, basically. And then ultimately get to a place then where Connor makes it very clear that Jim Harbaugh was not involved in this publicly. And because this entire PSYOP's goal was to wreck Michigan's national championship season, try to see if they can get it stopped, canceled, games not played, cast in doubt from the very beginning if they could not. That was the goal of the PSYOP. And so I think that the first thing we had to do was recognize where it was coming from. and then get to a place then where everybody involved would stop. That's because Michigan and Connor are simultaneously being targeted. You don't want them working against each other. That's exactly divide and conquer, brother. It's the oldest strategy in warfare.
There's a lot to digest there if you weren't a part of it like we were. And we're going to get to a little bit more because I want to relive a little bit of that night. There was the night that the Washington Post article dropped, and that was a bombshell, certainly from a national perspective, but on our end and the back end to those who were not a part of this, you have no idea the amount of things that we had to kind of dissect. So we're going to get to that here in just a moment. But before we do, listen, the summer is winding down. You're definitely going to want to either get to the ballpark or guess what? We've got actual college football games coming up here in just a few days, believe it or not. 2 days if you're not looking at Michigan's game. And Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They've got a 50% off Labor Day offer for the Diamondbacks and Dodgers if that's your jam. I don't know. It's football season, so pick your jam and go with it. But they've also got the super deal. It's absolutely amazing. You can save a heck of a lot of money. And the best part about Gametime is that you can view your seats before you buy. So you know exactly what you're going to be looking at. Trust me, as someone who was buying tickets well before the internet was the main way you did it, sometimes you got burned and you had no idea. So with the Gametime Picks, curation makes it easier to save more on sports, comedy, theater, concerts, all of that. And with the lowest price guarantee, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Now, one other thing before we move on here is if you're going to be watching games, you might as well have a little extra fun with it as well. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we've got a little something different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel, that's every single FanDuel customer, can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. It's the perfect time to get involved in that. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Well, Steve, it's a perfect time for a train to go by. I don't know if you can hear these on the podcast. I never really go back and re-listen when the train's there. I'm just amazed that my dog is being docile at this point. Nonetheless, before we get to that fateful evening, which I feel like changed the calculus on what we were dealing with, at least from our understanding. One thing I think that I absolutely should point out is that you were very forceful when it came to Connor. So a lot of people, I only got one after this documentary. It's as far as I've seen. I haven't looked at my Twitter mentions. I haven't looked at YouTube. But when it comes to the places where I actually will look at comments, I've only gotten one DM. It was on Instagram from an angry, I can only assume, Buckeye fan. Might have been an MSU fan. I don't know. And, this kind of sanctimonious, like he was cheating. I know this and you don't. And it's like, all right. And I've dealt with a lot of people that, in my circle, whether it's family or friends who don't root for Michigan, and they are quick to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to Connor. Jim Harbaugh had to know, and everyone had to know, and how couldn't they have known? And Connor's just lying to me, and all of this stuff. Why am I so confident Connor wasn't lying to me? In large part, it was due to you and the way that you addressed things. And sometimes there were places I felt like maybe he was unsure of what to say, and you kind of got in there and you certainly made sure that the truth kind of got brought out. So what was your impression of him, and like how truthful do you think that he was? How accurate do we feel his side of the story is?
I work in politics and I have for 20 years. I have been lied to 15 times before I hit the gym in the morning. Okay. I mean, the lying is a dialect in my line of work. And that's just from the people I agree with. Okay. I mean, that's just the amount of times I've been lied to by the people whose side of the aisle I'm on before I even get to the other side of the aisle. Okay. How much of what he told me is true down to the last syllable? I can't sit here, if you put the Wonder Woman lasso of truth on me, and say 100%. What I can say 100% is Connor Stalions is a sincere individual. And Connor Stalions wanted to do nothing more other than what you see in that documentary, be a college football coach. Wanted to do, I saw a meme earlier today. It made me chuckle because I knew we were getting ready to record this, and it's a pretty accurate description. I'm not sure the account realized it on X, but they said that Connor Stalions' only crime is loving Michigan too much. And that's pretty accurate, frankly. Okay. I mean, let me give you a hypothetical situation. I mean, you're sitting here and you're dealing with situations where they want to know if you paid for a hamburger for breakfast for a recruit. And you've got recruits calling you up and saying, listen, man, I was going to commit, but they just offered me a bunch of cash. And what do you expect? And you can't tell a kid, particularly from an impoverished background, yeah, don't get paid for your labor. Yeah, be poor. You can't do that. So you're like, God bless you, man. But yeah, that's another kid we didn't get. Meanwhile, they're coming after you for, giving a kid a burger for breakfast. I listened to you 5 years ago talking about Don Brown's signals getting stolen. Okay. So you hired this guy out of naval intelligence to basically come in here and hunker down and figure out your signals as well. The thing that really stuck out to me more than anything is when he pointed out to me, and he mentioned this a little bit in the documentary, that there's essentially an entire subculture of this. All right, that this is a known, accepted practice that goes on, and so that we're only debating, therefore, the level of zealousness and the gray area or did he break a rule or exploit a rule, which is basically what the entire documentary is about, is that distinction. But keep in mind, as we keep going back to this, that entire debate stems from something that we all agree isn't against the rules substantively as a premise. It's not against the rules to steal somebody's signals. So this is given what goes on in this sport, McDonald's bags. We all watched ESPN allege Tom Izzo basically housed a man in his home who was a danger to women. Nothing changed. Nothing happened. Nobody wanted to investigate when the number one recruit in the country said, well, I got offered $400,000 to not commit to Michigan on ESPN today. No one was intellectually curious to figure out that at all. So, there is more BS in college football than I see in politics. People are more sincere because at least they know who they are. At least there's more self-awareness. We're corrupt, and we just want to win. Now we're being honest with each other. The idea that Brohio is on the vanguard of integrity because in between being an incel, I am scoping the Venmo of the Michigan grad assistant. Okay, no, dude, you're not Woodward and Bernstein. Okay, you're a moron. And as William Shatner once famously said on Saturday Night Live, get a life, kiss a girl, touch grass. Okay, get out of the house. All right, that this was the biggest scandal ever. No, the biggest scandal ever is that Michigan people were tired of getting their faces kicked in by the University of Michigan football team. They were tired of it. And what's funny is I have a lot of friends in the media and in politics down south. I don't know what you heard. They don't care about this at all. They can't believe it's even a story. Almost all of the focus and obsession about this is from this region of the country. Down there, they're like, stealing signals? I mean, we're just trying to make sure that, the money I gave under the table to this recruit doesn't get reported to the IRS as income. I mean, this entire thing was preposterous, Isaiah, that this was some kind of moral line was a joke. It was a joke from the very beginning. It doesn't have any merit at all. And that's why it was a psyop from the very beginning. It's, hey, we can't beat Michigan, so we got to come up with some other reason to stop them. The commissioner of the league suspends the coach based on the NCAA telling him they had no evidence that he was actually involved. That's just beyond preposterous. It even says in the documentary, This is the first time they could, even the reporter who probably received stolen materials, my opinion, all right, even the reporter from the Washington Post is like, I was kind of surprised that the NCAA acted on this so fast. Okay. What is unique about Michigan and Harbaugh? Is it that he was on the vanguard of calling for the transfer portal? Is it that he was on the vanguard of the players ought to be compensated, which goes right against the NCAA's model? This entire system, it's more hypocritical and corrupt than even politics because the people in it are dumber.
And unfortunately, those are the people at the top that are judge, jury, and executioner. We still haven't gotten to that fateful night. We're going to have to do that in segment 3, if that's okay. But we will do that here in just one moment. But before we do, listen, it's I know I said it's Wednesday. For us, it's actually Tuesday. And Lord knows that I need pick-me-ups basically every couple hours. Otherwise, someone over here gets sleepy unless it's actual sleepy time. And the great part about that is 5-hour energy. You can have it after lunch. If you're tired after lunch, you're not alone. In fact, research shows that over 70% of us hit that wall after lunch. Let a 5-hour energy shot help you leap over that wall. Heck, even when you're watching sports, you can grab a 5-hour energy shot to stay alert and watch all of your favorite games. You're going to need to be able to go through that marathon. If you stayed up too late watching that intense overtime game, you can take a 5-hour energy shot in the morning so that you can start your day. So there is that. Remember that. So go to 5hourenergy.com. And that's the number 5, by the way. hourenergy.com and get some 5-hour energy products today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB and receive 20% off of your order. This offer is only available till September 20th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. This code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, Steve, thanks for sticking with us. It's a little longer than I anticipated, but we've got a lot of stuff to cover, right? Because this is stuff that we covered over weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, it was like a month of if I wasn't on the phone with you and Connor, and I wasn't on the phone with just Connor, you and I had a lot of sidebars. There was a lot of ground to cover to kind of figure a lot of these things out. But the thing that was the kind of cipher to this entire thing came the night that the Washington Post article dropped. And we learned in real time kind of that this was a much bigger story than we had initially thought, because Will Hobson and his story revealed we kind of had to overlook this whole, like, you know, in a computer that everyone had access to. That was the framing of it. The most important part of the story was that this information was handed over by a private investigation firm. And we also had to deal with a Connor who had no idea what was going on, right? Certainly there are some details. We don't know yet if this spreadsheet that the NCAA has, if it indeed is his, because there's been no chain of custody. But at the same time, there was some clear evidence in that they had at least things correct that was only for his eyes. That's one of the things that people don't understand. Some of the things, the details were in here that they used in their article to be like, this was the scheme, this was that. This wasn't something that was disseminated. This wasn't even something that anyone knew about other than Connor Stalions. This was at least had some evidence that was herein within the article that was for his eyes only, for his own personal accounting. Again, I can't speak to whether or not this was his actual spreadsheet or if they somehow had gotten eyes on it. But what do you remember about that night, and how much did this kind of open up the case in your eyes to, okay, we're dealing with something much bigger here than, you know, a psyop or mere potential illegal sign stealing, whatever you want to call it?
To me, it's the Rosetta Stone of the psyop. It was the confirmation of the psyop we saw, because you're not going to get sports media outlets. It's not like in my line of work where there are entire networks and platforms that are aligned with a particular party or ideology, and so they're gonna forward your narrative because they have a mutual interest there. Okay, ESPN's not going to do that. The Washington Post is not going to do that for sports. They might do it for political causes, but they're not going to do it for a sports scandal. They're going to need evidence. Okay. And you saw Will Hobson say in the documentary that he got this evidence from an investigative firm, and he's going to assume that they obtained this legally. Okay. And so this speaks well of the Washington Post, that they were clearly very concerned that the evidence that they were going to publish in their, austere paper was acquired on the up and up. They're going to just assume that it was good. Okay.
But why would the NCAA, investigate it otherwise? That means it has to be legit.
Correct. And I think you have to ask yourself then, because this is, again, such a nuanced issue, given the scandals we have had in collegiate sports. This is nothing. Okay. This isn't Connie Hawkins or anything like that. And to me, we were on the phone with him. One of the calls we had, if I recall correctly, was he found out in real time that his private communications were tampered with. Somebody that they had been altered, and he discovered this while he was talking to us, going back to figure out how did they obtain this information. And I've always operated under the theory, Isaiah, because I had heard, I did checking around on my end too. I didn't just, if I'm going to stick my nose into it, I need to know, independently, is this even worth my time? And I checked with some media sources and people I know, and there were crazy rumors out there that Michigan had hacked the practice film of Ohio State. Okay. And because I don't believe that you risk the kind of smoke that whoever it is that procured the PR firm, you don't risk the smoke of that information one day coming out and risk potentially committing a crime that some people might determine is industrial espionage. You don't risk something like that over a nuance, over a practice that is well done and documented within the sport of stealing signs. And it's not even illegal. You're not doing it over that. Now, you would do it if you thought your rival had hacked into your practice footage. You do it over something like that. And what I think happened is Ohio State thought that that's what Michigan was doing. And that's why you go out and get a PR firm, because you think you're sitting on, that would be the scandal of scandals, something like that. And they messed around, and all they came back with was this lousy T-shirt that said Connor Stalions on it. And now you got to justify this and blow it. And the fact that it was blown way out of proportion is in the middle of the season, when this isn't May, when there's nothing else to talk about, but when there's games, is indicative of that, I believe.
Yeah, and I think that's where we were able to that night kind of figure out the why, especially because here's the thing, and weirdly, I see a lot of Buckeyes on social media today being like, Jim Harbaugh gave him a game ball. He admitted, it's like, okay, breaking news. Michigan's espionage guy at Sign Stealer stole signs and then got recognized for being good at stealing signs.
By the way, what was the first team in the documentary? He says, I got good stealing signs where?
At the Navy
Academy. So let me say this to Buck Slap 14. Okay. Congratulations that you have apparently more honor. Okay. You understand the honor of sport more than the United States Naval Academy does. Props to you. Now get out of your mom's basement and put down the code red.
So there was one other element to this that we discovered that night, and this is not something that I have revealed yet. And this was the kind of smoking gun to all of it. And it's not something, unfortunately, that we can replicate. But it was one of those things where when we were starting to tie everything together, and I mentioned on the Tuesday episode that there was, there was a hack at the university, there was a system-wide thing. And we agreed in that moment that it might not have been that this firm hacked the entire university, but we recognized that could have been a moment in which that was the vulnerability was used against Michigan, right? That's an opening. That's a door that just suddenly was cracked open. But Connor, he let us know something that was huge. And that was that he had this spreadsheet on his Google Drive or something like that. And he couldn't move it. He couldn't delete it. He could move things around to other places, but he just noticed like this one particular file refused to move, refused to do anything. What was your reaction when you heard that?
We're now left with only two options. Someone at Michigan gave this to the Washington Post. which would require, if you're Connor Stalions, one action now, right? Because now you're not just at war externally, but someone at Michigan is openly trying to sabotage their own season. Which
let's also keep in mind, this was on his personal computer. It's just, it happened to be within the building.
Correct. Which, you know, as Michigan fans, we like to jump on our message boards and lament Michigan's self-destructiveness, but Michigan's not going to do that in the middle of a national championship season. So, but we couldn't say it was 0%. Maybe it was only 1%, but it wasn't zero. The more likely option, therefore, becomes there's a third party that has gained access to his proprietary information without his consent. And by a lot of interpretations, that would be a form of a computer crime, you know, and that takes this thing to an entirely different level. And I think that was probably, you know, if Connor were here, he probably would also tell you that was probably the moment he also realized this is a way bigger story than maybe even he was anticipating or understood at that particular moment.
And it'll be interesting to see if this could ever be figured out, because there was a moment, it was kind of in the tail end of when in your involvement, when there was a lawyer who tried to that suddenly requested access to his Google Drive. And one of the outlets that I knew that was, once I found that out, I forwarded it on to someone who had a little bit more power to investigative power, right? I'm a beat writer. I don't know where to begin with in an actual investigation. And they had reached out to that entity, and they just responded, well, I'm not going to comment on that. Again, I know there's going to be a lot of people that don't believe this, but this is how this all went down. We found him to be very credible. I had conversations with people in and around Michigan. Everything was consistent. And I understand that there's a lot of people who want to wish cast this to be something different, something more, something less salacious for the rival schools and more salacious for Michigan. But it's just not what I've found in the course of this. And I know that you can attest to that, Steve. So thank you. I appreciate you coming and joining us, Steve. Pete, you can find him at Michigan Podcast. You can that's on social media. You can also watch his show, Michigan Podcast, which is a great watch between his own segments and Mark Rogers joining and getting kind of that cross, the 10-year war cross between the two of you there for what is it? You call it 10 Minutes War, don't you?
Yes, it's an homage to the 10-year war. Yes.
It's a wonderful show. I highly recommend it. You can find that on YouTube. Thanks again, Steve. I appreciate you joining.
Appreciate it, Isaiah. And let me just say one final thing to Michigan fans. Don't live your life caring what people who hate you and hate your success think about you. Nothing to take away from the accomplishment of and how special that team was a year ago and what they did in the lifetime of memories and the way they performed after this entire story came out. And if it wasn't for Connor Stalions, bitter Bucknuts and Sparties would just come up with something else to try to complain about and minimize it. Use their hatred and false piety as fuel as recognition that they know and you know and you know and they know we kick their ass.
Absolutely. I actually said something very similar to Clayton Sayfie earlier today. But that's going to do it for us today here on this show. We will be back on Thursday, and if everything goes right, we're going to have our brand new our weekly preview guest. He is a former player on the Wolverines, and it's one that was just on the team last year. He's a national championship winner. So look forward to that. So we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. Peace.